So Microscope's been around for over 30 years. The subject of cloud has been something that, to be honest, we've been writing about for at least 5 or 6 years. I'm not going to lie, when it first started, we viewed it a little bit like ASP or VoIP. This perhaps was something which was topical, trendy, and might not last. I mean, we have to write about it anyway. But yeah, we've been writing with increasing volume. I could write cloud stories all day, every day, if it took my fancy, as that's something which really is now dominating the industry. What we try and do, like I said, is we try and give people guidance about what's the good, what's the bad, what's the ugly, and what should you be doing. And a lot of people are on journeys, whether that's from traditional break-fix to managed services, or just people who popped up as born in the cloud. So we're trying to cover all of those aspects. I think what I want to do is just start and say where are we right now? I think we're probably still a little bit confused, to be honest, and I say this as someone even on Microscope. Everybody seems to have their own definition of cloud, public, private, hybrid. Everybody seems to get a different message every time they sit down in front of a vendor, and I think that has caused quite a lot of problems. I think a lot of customers have been confused by it, a lot of journalists have been confused by it, and I think you've ended up with people taking little bits of it and trying to interpret it. Often, to be blunt, most people are doing some of the cloud, or certainly from a reseller point of view, have started to develop managed services, but obviously unless they feel it matches the criteria, some fail to realise how far advanced they have become. I think that there's still a little bit of hype around it. There's still a feeling, certainly when I'm writing stories about it, there's still a feeling that we're writing about, in some cases, a sort of immature technology. Just when I say mature, I mean in terms of what does that mean for the channel, how's it working its way through, and even after 5 years, it still has that ring sometimes of, oh, here we go again. So I think that's a serious issue, which is one that has to be acknowledged and faced up to and talked to with customers. I don't think you can assume that customers know what you're talking about. In fact, there are some resellers that now deliberately avoid using the word cloud because of the negative connotations that come with that. What I just wanted to share with you, just to give you a flavour of the sort of things we've been writing, these are headlines which, again, back up what I say: confusion in the cloud, some channel players, 6 degrees, and central stage. Again, people are coming out saying, you know, this isn't necessarily easy. It has to be pitched in the right way. It has to be sold to the customer in a you know, handheld. A lot of education still needed there. I think one of the other problems is that the market's swamped by competitive claims. Every vendor obviously says they're brilliant. Every vendor says that their cloud solution is the best on the market. I think sometimes, to be blunt, they're not. I think it's all very well and good taking on-premise and then putting a hosted element to it. I think sometimes there's not much thought beyond that. I think the danger for the channel is working out which is the solution that you want to take to market. As you're building a sort of portfolio, you need to make sure you understand which ones actually work and which ones will not leave the customer disappointed and upset with your performance. I was at an event last week where somebody said that a good cloud provider, MSP, now has to deliver infrastructure, IT, sort of hardware, software skills, and networking. So you're looking to build a portfolio approach, and choosing your vendor and choosing those pieces of the jigsaw is incredibly important. I think the other big theme of where we are right now is this idea of time running out. Lots of people stand up at events like this and say if you're a traditional tin shifting reseller, you're doomed. And I think that that's been said on and off over the last 3 or 4 years. I'm not saying it's not true, but I think part of the problem has been that those people are still making money. It's tougher, of course, the margins are tighter, but I think unlike the Windows XP cut-off date, there is no cut-off here. So I think that's caused some confusion. I think some people have delayed what's going on. I think there's a lot of talk at the moment about Generation X and Y. One of the unfair assumptions, I think, is that Generation X are delaying the move to the cloud because unlike Generation Y, they are perhaps intimidated by it. But certainly I think you've got to be very careful in if you're talking to a traditional hardware vendor who's saying, hey, don't worry about it, you've got plenty of time. I don't think that's necessarily true, and I think you have to be aware of that. Again, I'll give you one example of a story along these lines. This was at Cloud Expo earlier this year. The outsourcer boss, who's Piers Linney on Dragon's Den, he regularly uses his keynote slot to scare people and tell them that time is running out and they're doomed. But I do think that there's a legitimate thing here, and you seriously have to think, if you haven't started to move towards the cloud, then perhaps 2015 should be your year. So where are we going? Already you can see some of the early adopters, both those who have had a traditional model and have invested, and those firms that are born in the cloud. Those people who popped up in the last couple of years without the baggage of the legacy, who have just gone straight to the cloud model. We're seeing an awful lot of vendors wanting to support partners, talking about extending MSP functionality and accreditations into their partner programs, trying to give people the helping hand. Again, this is why it's such a good time now, I think, to get involved with the cloud, because the resellers are going to be helped by the vendors. Whether that, I'm not saying that help will come and go, but I think now's the time when there's more of it around. I think if you look at some of those people who have invested in the cloud, a couple I've spoken to recently spring to mind, Insight and SCC. The other change I'm starting to see is that they're no longer, not embarrassed by it, but no longer keeping quiet about it. You're starting to see people flex their muscles, starting to see people talk about what they've done, about 5 years of change, cultural change, investment, and they're now starting to be a bit more bullish. So I think again that puts pressure that we've maybe had a couple of years where some of those people who've been leading from the front, to be blunt, they were hardly household names. You could have looked at the MSP mentor list, which is always worth a look. They do the top 100 MSPs across Europe, and some of them you would never have heard of. But I think you're going to see going forward real ambition coming through here. And of course, on a customer level, if they see some firms being very proud of what they're doing in cloud, they will obviously ask questions of those who will not. One of the big questions when cloud started to emerge was, what would it mean for distribution? Some people again like to say, that's it, distribution's finished, it's all over. I think actually we've seen distribution start to reinvent itself. They've come up with the sort of support that partners need, and some useful tips. I mean, we've seen, to give you a couple of examples, Ingram Micro were very heavily involved with the Channel Transformation Alliance, which is not just about technology for the cloud, but also the practical, going from a sort of a model where you've got your lump sums for your licenses to the flexible pay-as-you-go. I think a lot of vendors just haven't addressed the financial implications for the channel, and I think distribution, quite rightfully, has stepped in there. It's always had a bit of a role as a credit house and a bank. So we've seen that happen. We've seen some people develop some interesting approaches. I'll give you one example. Computer Links, before it was bought by Arrow, was doing some interesting stuff with Alvia, which was a cloud platform. So I think you've had that approach, which is, there's obviously an expectation that only very few resellers will build their own cloud infrastructure, so the distributors are building it for you, putting it together, and I think most of them have done quite a good job of that. So it's far from being the end of distribution. I think it's just another stage and another phase. And I think certainly when you're trying to build a solution you have to go, you really have to go via distribution. Just to give you some examples of how that's translated to copy in the magazine, this is some of the coverage of the Channel Transformation Alliance, which, like I say, Ingram were pushing very heavily across Europe, and lots of practical help. Their approach was to make sure that people could deal with it in terms of culture and finance. I think a lot of people forget that you're going to have a sales team that's been selling one way potentially for quite a long time, who's now going to have to sell in a different way, and you're going to have sales teams who are remunerated in a different way. Both of these are serious challenges. It doesn't happen overnight, and so I think where you can get advice and you can get help, seek it out. So, how does this all translate in terms of how resellers, when we're talking to our readership, what are they saying to us? We're finding that year on year we do a piece of channel research every year. More and more people are describing themselves as managed service providers. I think this year it was 30% said that was their main source of revenue, which was a big leap from before. And we're seeing that very, very few do not have some element of managed services in the kit bag. Again, more vendors are being much more formal about the cloud, and MSPs having accreditation certifications as part of their partner programs, and making it much more of a recognised approach to the market. I think we see all of that just accelerating more going forward. I think that whether you do it as a side project within an existing business, or whether, like I say, it is your business and you're born to the cloud, more and more people will see their revenues coming from that. I mean, to give you an example from when I met SCC recently, they'd seen services and cloud revenues increase, and they'd seen their traditional hardware decrease. And they were quite happy with that. That was part of the plan. So I think you have to manage that change, you have to manage the sales teams, and you have to manage, in some cases, your customers. I think going to managed services, there are some customers who will adapt to that very easily, and there's some that won't. And I think that culture will you'll have to talk to people about that, and potentially you can part ways with some customers that don't work to the model you're going to. Again, in terms of headlines, these are a few that give you a flavour of how the vendors are backing the channel. So we're seeing McAfee, AVG, IBM. I mean, these were just a few I picked out. There were many, many, many more. And even over, I'd say, the last 6 weeks, the theme has really been partner programs. Everybody seems to be rolling out new programs for 2015, and all of them have had an MSP element, cloud element to it. So I think that's just going to continue. And obviously, it goes without saying, if you are part of that MSP program, there's specific rewards, specific training, specific rebates, so it makes much more sense to get involved with that. But I'm not going to pretend it's been easy. We've reported on quite a few problems as people have gone from traditional breakthroughs to cloud. I think there is a lot of, not naivety, but I think there's a desire that this would be a quick process, that it's something that could be rolled out over a weekend. And I've heard some people say as long as 18 months. I think it is speeding up because the technology is there, but it can take a long, long time to get your technology in place, get your culture changed. I think that's the big one, I think the culture. And I think the other thing we've seen is that there really is no fixed destination here. We're talking about constant evolution. So a couple of years ago, the people who were being really held up as the MSP pioneers were fantastic in the sort of lockdown desktop environment where they could roll out agents and do all your patch management and your backups, and they just couldn't cope with mobility. And so I think you can't sit still. We're seeing obviously mobility come in, the Internet of Things, wearable text, big buzzword at the moment. So I think you can get to a certain destination but don't stop. You have to keep it going, keep looking at what the customers are demanding, because ultimately they're the ones who will be looking for the help. And so I think we have seen some people get to where they think an MSP should be and stop, and I think there's a real danger in that. I think the other problem we've seen is that some people just haven't got the financial models right, and they've one guy I met who had a great business but it almost went bust because every time they got a new client they recruited a new salesperson to handle that client, and it got to the stage where they were almost shutting the doors. There's things you can learn. I think there's much more of a mentoring, partnering atmosphere in the channel at the moment, so I think you can go to people and you can ask them and just say, hey look, what was good, what was bad? And don't be surprised if you hear it's about people and process, perhaps more than technology. The other problem has been, and this is probably more at a customer level, is that there have been problems. I mean, cloud isn't perfect. Azure keeps going down, providing quite a lot of headlines, and so on the public side, that's been a big issue about people like Amazon, Google, Microsoft. What happens when it goes down? And it does sadly go down, and of course every time it does, people like us, we write about it because it has big implications for customers. So I think that's a serious issue that you can't dodge the bullet on that one. You have to face up to the fact that customers are going to be worried about reliability and consistency. And I think the other thing, of course, 2E2 was a big story for us, but there's obviously that fear, what happens if you go out of business and you're looking after my data, where does that go, how can I get it back? And I think there's been a painful learning curve there. There's some people who just have not been grown up about it, I think, and just explain where the data is. I mean, we're seeing one of the things that, although cloud could be anywhere, we are seeing a very, very strong drive for people who want to buy local and people who want to be able to see and touch. So that was with somebody the other week who owns a data centre who said that they're running tools almost every day, customer tools where the customer wants to come in and touch the data. So I think you've got to, almost if you can, be aware of these fears and you have to deal with them. Again, just to give you a flavour, obviously 2E2 was big for us, you don't want to see things like rights to rescue, because customers don't want to be rescued, they shouldn't be in that situation. But that did have real implications. And then again, Azure, which I think that was just from the other day, and Amazon has had its problems as well. But it's not all doom and gloom. I think the industry is coming up with the answers. I think it's very, very difficult now for customers to get obsessed about the security issues. I think the industry's done an awful lot to show customers that they can secure data and protect data and restore data, because ultimately it's the channel's business, and if the channel can't do it, they're out of business. And we've seen industry groups do their bit to calm customers and arm the channel with the best skills and provide some education. So we've seen Cloud Industry Forum do an awful lot talking about transparency, about the need to make sure that you say what you can deliver and you deliver, and you don't miss out. I think that's been one of the big problems as well, is that people could go into a pitch promising the earth and then let the customer down. And CompTIA, who are here today, there's lots of resources out there for advice, training and guidance about best practice and how you can deliver the best solution to your customers. Again, giving you some headlines. These are about the Cloud Industry Forum, and like I said, their big thing over the last few years has been about transparency. And that's both sides, that's both reseller and customer, because if you're going into a cloud relationship, and either side is sort of holding something back or exaggerating, then it's going to be doomed. And the feeling, I think, is that that message is really starting to get through. Some of the cowboys, not the 2 necessarily into that bracket, but I think some of the problematic providers have disappeared from the market. So, in conclusion, what I'd say to you is that, yeah, this did start as hype, and there's a lot of noise. It's been very difficult sometimes it's almost like pinning the tail on a donkey. What does cloud actually mean? And I'm guilty of that, and so the rest of the press in being part of that hype machine. But all of the reports and the research that comes through, and floods of it does come through, indicates that markets are taking off, and customers are either using more cloud right now, or they're going to be investing in more cloud next year, and the channel has to be ready to deliver that. Every year we have a discussion where we say, what are we going to be writing about next year? And for the last couple, I don't even need to go to that meeting. We write about the same things, pretty much. The big things are cloud, mobility, big data, social, and security. The reason they're big things is because they're on every customer's agenda, and the technology, we're talking about very broad things here, so the technology and opportunities for the channel are still evolving, still emerging. But I would say that you can expect to see more people become MSPs, develop that type of capability, more of your customers demanding cloud services, more of your competitors pitching themselves as a solution. And so 2015 really has to be, if it hasn't been, it has to be your year for cloud and your year to make a change. Thank you.